Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Illumi-Nation. I just encourage you all to sit back and enjoy what is going to be a very rich discussion today. For any of you who are used to listen to my old podcast, Rock Your Shine, you may recognize our guest today, Daniel Adams, who I interviewed quite some time ago, and we have invited him back to this podcast. So welcome, Daniel. I'm just going to quickly read your bio, and then I'm going to have you share a little bit about your story, and then we'll dive right in. So Daniel Adams is a returned citizen after 3 decades of incarceration. As a matter of fact, his 4th year anniversary is coming up on the 21st of this month. And he has been a very busy man since he's been out. He has been in long-term recovery, which we will be talking about. He has starred in a documentary called Behind the Rage: Domestic Violence in America. He is a trainer of trainers in domestic violence. He is a peer recovery specialist. He is a peer activated resilience and certified older adult peer specialist. And he now is in Recovery Leadership Academy of Virginia Commonwealth of Virginia University. And he is a man who loves everyone. So welcome, Daniel, to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Susie. Thank you, Valerie. Yes.
So why don't we jump in and why don't you go ahead and share your story with our listeners?
Well, I guess when I share my story, I do have to go back to my upbringing um, and what was instilled in me psychologically and emotionally because of the house I grew up in. Um, Not only do I refer to it as dysfunctional, also use the word fractional because being the last of 12,
Mm.
um, nobody paid me no attention. And not being nurtured, I was cared for, but not being loved, not knowing how to uh, um, develop um, as I was growing older. The first thing I did, not only was I consistently acting out, not knowing why I was acting out. But as soon as the first thing that was offered to me, would say really in the early '70s was a hit of vodka in a Marlboro cigarette, and from that point, that was the only thing that made me feel that, and all the different drugs that I used, alcohol and drugs was something that gave me a sense of normalcy because um, I had so much rage. I really did not know how much my rage was until um, actually acted out on my rage to the degree. But I realized that because of my upbringing, it made me a bully because I couldn't appropriately or effectively recognize what emotions that I was going through and intelligently be able to um, express those emotions. So I lived that way, and so from living that way, I used drugs and alcohol to the extent that I had to first thing in the morning I had to be high, and the last thing at night I had to be high. So that was the course of my life. Um, I, I had no stability whatsoever. Um, I was 28 years old before I went to prison. I was 28 years old when I gave my mother her first hug because that was something that never happened. Um, with my siblings, we never expressed love. And I had one sister though; she was always consistently there. She was the 10th in the family, and I was the 12th. she was the one that was consistently, not only was she there for me, she was there for her nieces and nephews as well. Her name was Naomi. We nicknamed her Baby. Um, this past February 27th has been 1 year since she um, as I say, returned to the essence, which means she passed on. And still she had life left in her, but at 65 years old, Arlington County Police Department and Fire Department went in the house and found her dead sitting in a chair in her house. Um, she was the one that actually she did 30 years. She did those 3 decades. She was consistently there for me. But when I got out, that was a whole different script, which I will get to. Um, but as I was growing up, um, I couldn't hold down a job for a year. I went from job to job. Um, I really didn't understand the emotional portion of being in a healthy relationship because um, I never knew how my decision making was horrible because I never really knew how to make appropriate age appropriate decisions. Um, Not only that, I knew how to make bad decisions, and I continued that. I became a person who was extremely defensive about everything, and I didn't know why. And and I realized that the only time I really ever spoke to my father was in '81 when I asked him to hire me after I went to the career center, took bricklaying up for 2 years. I thought maybe when I got out of school, because I dropped out at the 10th grade, so I went to adult education, and still wasn't successful at that neither. But I went to Arlington County Career Center, and I took bricklaying up for 2 years, and I took cooking up for one. Ended up becoming a cook. I cooked at some really good places. Most notable was the Smithsonian American History Building. I cooked for only the executives, and I did catering for them as well throughout natural American history, natural history, air and space in the old castle, which was the first Smithsonian building. But I couldn't hold that job for a year. Um, so I went through treatment twice. In '86, I went to treatment because I was a complete. At that time, I was really smoking crack, and within a couple months, my life was total hell.
Yeah.
Um, and I went to treatment for 28 days and didn't deal with anything. The first day out of treatment, I was back smoking crack.
It's a hard place to be. I just want to kind of interject a little bit. I I want to say that like when it comes to like emotional intelligence, I think that more often than not we're all in the same boat, except your situation was just uh, obviously extreme and more obvious. But I think that I just want to kind of like honor that moment before you move on, because the work that I do was shadow work. I'd say 99.99% of the time, nobody really knows how to deal with their big emotions, and nobody really truly understands how to take an emotion, break it down, and figure out what a need is. It's just something that's not taught mainstream in this world. And, depending on the level of trauma that you've experienced, or just your experience in general with you, is like a little bit of neglect, a little bit of trauma. You have like a little montage. It's like it could be way more obvious, within your experiences and ability to have self-control, or you have these big voids that most people experience in life, and it's like you don't know how to fill that because you're not able to recognize what that need is that's not being met. But the reason I'm saying this is because I want everybody to know, in these situations, that it's something that is something that everybody experiences most often. And I think in situations like this, coming from a place myself where I had, you know, uh, came from an environment in certain times of my life that, like, there was a lot of poverty and fighting and aggressiveness, that, you think that you're alone in that situation, that there's this group of people that has it together, and then me, right? And I just want to say this for anyone that's out there listening, that the circumstances that you're living in doesn't change the ability to really truly understand that freedom aspect of it and understanding your emotions, because it's just such a big part of our experience. It tells us what we need in our life, to have a happy or negative experience. So I just kind of wanted to share that. I shifted into another topic because I
That's
want people to not feel alone. And there's just a variety of different life experiences, but we're all living in the same moment where we're all just trying to figure this out too.
but I would have to say that that portion of being alone is how I felt.
Yeah.
I was always I was a loner.
Yeah.
I, I was,
I can relate. Yeah.
and even to the degree like yesterday, I felt that yesterday.
Yeah.
You know, because I did not know how. I I never had friends when I was coming up that actually came over and spent time in the house, because that just it was just like this house just had an energy in it that repelled people from coming into this house. None of my other siblings, when my older siblings were turned 18 and graduated from high school, they had to get the hell up out of there
Yeah.
with the quickness. And then when my father left, that energy never changed. So I used to get the words from my mother. I wish I never had you. I wish
Yeah.
you were never born. You just like your. I used to get nothing but all. And so my outlet was to be alone, um, in the dark, or I would listen to like Earth, Wind, and Fire. That was a group that just somehow sung to that portion of the old Earth, Wind, and Fire, like the album. Um, Last Days in Time. That was their first album. Their second album was Open Your Eyes, and their third album was Head to the Sky. That's when I actually seen them for the first time in concert at the Carter Burn in DC. But the
Yeah.
thing about it was that was somehow they related to my pain. So then when That's the Way of the World album came out, that really stuck with me, especially a song Hearts of Fire creates love desire to take you high, high to a place on the throne, and just the lyrics that actually goes through talking to it. But as far as having any additional family members like uncles and aunts, had lots of them. Never had a conversation or relationship with any of them, because
Right.
they didn't do that. and,
Well,
and
I think that and I want to just like step in again, but I think that like it's hard because that ancestral trauma is running through all of your blood, and your experience isn't your experience alone, even though most often like we isolate when we're feeling this way. It's something that pain runs deep in everybody that's within your family, whether they're able to put the pieces together or not. And I think that we all have trauma that we're passing down through the lineage, and it's unavoidable. It's genetic and it's passed down, and that's something that is really hard, especially where there's abuse situations, where there's actual physical violence. Those moments are also passed down ancestrally. There's trauma, there's history behind your lineage. And that's something that is unavoidable until you step into like, how am I going to now uh, heal some of this. So this visceral reaction doesn't exist in me anymore, and it's really hard. And then for you also having the actual experience outside of what the ancestral trauma is, probably led to exactly what your situation was, where you ended up incarcerated. I don't know if you want to shift into a little bit of that moment for you.
I want to kind of go step, because I look at it where I profess to my nieces and nephews that I didn't have uncles that invested any time in me, but I'm going to break that cycle.
Go ahead.
And I invest not in time in them and in time in their kids and such. But one of the points that reminds me, not long ago, I heard things about my grandmother, the only grandmother that was alive when I was born and was growing up, lived I really right around the corner from her, but she never wanted to even meet me. Come to find out that she was where my mother gets all of that bad energy from is because from her, because her brothers also had that bad energy. One of her sons, who was an alcoholic, it was cold and freezing one night, and he was in the house drunk, naked. And my oldest brother was sent around the corner by my mother to go around there to put clothes on my Uncle Richard. And she wouldn't let my brother Michael in the house to put clothes on, so he froze to death and died that night. I had another uncle, my Uncle Lawrence. He was a heroin junkie. He overdosed and died. Both of them two were fought in World War II.
Yeah.
They're buried in Arlington Cemetery. Um, my uncle Lloyd, he was such a physical abuser that I know just from on their wedding day to my Aunt Marie, he beat her up on their
Yeah.
wedding day. So that means he was beating her up before, and then as we were growing up, uh, he would he would put so much pain on his kids that Aunt Marie would get in the car and ride from Arlington to Alexandria. My father would go over there and beat him up every time because he didn't beat them up so bad that his oldest daughter, Eunice, she lived on the streets of D.C. because she was a heroin addict. Her whole house, but that was the way that they dealt. My cousin Lenny, who was their brother, he died of AIDS from shooting up. So what I'm showing is this
This
thing.
pattern.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, and,
It's deep. It is.
Yeah.
and then as it was at 29 years old, 28 when I met her. Name was Tracy. Met her in my second rehab, and I did 90 days in the treatment center here in Arlington, and I didn't do no work. So I'm getting out of there. I met her. She came to a meeting. I met her. As soon as I get out, I'm chasing behind her, and that was the worst thing I could have done because I was still so screwed up. When she really didn't want to have a relationship with me, I got violent with her the first time. That was the first time. I was I was locked up in Alexandria jail, and once I had the opportunity to talk to her, she never pressed charges and they released me. I married her. Um, it was May 29th. I married her of 89. We didn't make it a year. We didn't make it a year. Um, we moved from one apartment where she was first living at into another apartment um, in when in April I got fired from the job at the Smithsonian. I went right back to smoking crack. I went on a binge for several days and came back. Um, I kind of knew it was over. It was over. Um, I left that apartment in June. I left that apartment in June, and and I stalked her. I stalked her, and she and from June to September. When I went knocked on the door the morning of September the 19th, she opened the door, and she must have seen the craziness that was on. She let me in and was telling me she was going to work, and I was begging her to take me back. And then all I know is once the mace hit my face, I just, I was already tilted. And once the mace hit my face, um, that's when things got, um, when I realized what I was doing, I panicked and I jumped up and I ran.
Yeah.
I didn't know that I had stabbed her 13 times.
Yeah.
Until the court proceedings. I didn't know that. And but it was only one fatal blow. Um, I won't forget it. It was here. I didn't even know, but all up and down her body, I had stabbed her.
Mm-hmm.
And
I just want to pause you for a moment, Daniel, just so I can hold space for you, because I'm sure that as you're kind of talking about this, like the energetic memories kind of pull up where it's really heavy. And I know before we hopped on this, I was kind of sharing, I lived the other side of it, where I was in a relationship with an addict, and he had tried to light me on fire in front of my family. And so it I want to say, coming from the other side of it, just knowing that we're all coming from like our own places of trauma and emotion, where what drew me into that situation was the same thing that might have drawn you into the situation. And when it comes to having big emotions in life, and not, and like the impulse, and like we're talking about the ancestral trauma around it, that it's 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 hard, for just as hard and traumatic for you as it was for me being the receiver of the situation. You know what I mean? And so just coming from the other end of it, I think that just having compassion for yourself, I think, in this moment, and allowing yourself to really understand the trauma that you've experienced, so you can have a little compassion for yourself. I think that it's really hard to live with the guilt of the situation. And for me, being on the other side of it, having children, like for a really long time in my healing journey, it was really hard for me to heal my own experience and allowing my kids to even be a part of that and experience things, even though they weren't being abused. I was, there's just so much heaviness involved, and like stepping into a place of forgiveness. I just feel like the urge to talk to you about this, because I think part of the healing, when we do this work, you're really trying to balance your mind, your body, and your soul. And you're such a warrior in a lot of ways. And you're so self-aware, and you're so open about your experience and everything that kind of led up to this moment. And it's not coming from a place of excuses. It's just coming from a place of authenticity and like the reality of your experience. And I think the other side of that is, as authentic and real as you can be with it all, being kind and loving and gentle to yourself at the end. Like, obviously, if you could hop in a time machine, it never would have happened to begin with. You would have realized what you needed, but that's not in the mindset that you were in, and how have you really stepped into like holding space for yourself and stepping into a place of forgiveness for yourself so you can let some of this density go?
It took a long time, really over 3 decades, for me to even get to a point where my forgiveness, my shame and my guilt lessened. Um,
Mhm.
Chaplain Mark would always tell me, God's forgiven you. You need to forgive yourself. But it wasn't that easy.
It's
It
not.
took me a long time to hold my head up, um, where because of how I felt when I was incarcerated, it was hard for me to even tell other prisoners who was even close to me what I was in prison for. Um, since, but one of the things I started to do the work. I started to do the work while when I could pass a lot of my anger was so bad.
Yeah.
It was so bad in prison. Um, it really was. Um, and then I read an article in 2013 about a lady named Amanda, um, and who had been in a domestic violence relationship. Oh, but prior to that, in 2001, I just I knew I needed help because there was no programs in prison that helped me, and so I started writing state senators and delegates, and one of them wrote me back, and he wrote me back, and he sent me two addresses to Catholic Diocese of Richmond and the Men's Turning Point in Dumfries. That's who I wrote to. And in January 2002, they wrote me and they sent me a DV 2000 workbook, which is Domestic Violence 2000 workbook. And that was my introduction to the will of the violence, the will of violence, the cycle of violence. And 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 I was just like, you know, the coordinator at the time, she said that she would actually become I mean, she was the director. She said she would become my coordinator. And that's when I felt like I was starting to get some help. But still, the shame didn't allow me to
Yeah.
express to other guys um, what I was in there for, who was, like I said, dear to me. That's still active in my life today, from um, our incarceration. And and in 2005, I left one prison and went to another. And she sent the video crew. She sent the video crew to come and and have a document, create my first documentary. And they came to the prison, and we were, it was two men and it was two female COs. We in the visiting room throughout the week, and they sat down and they had the conversation. And even still, at a time with the two female COs, I was ashamed. I was so ashamed that they was listening to me tell my story, and they was listening to it because I wanted them not to see me in that light. I
Yeah.
want, you know, and so while they did it, we recorded it, and it was played for the Acts program that's local, uh, um, um, in Dumfries, and that place is still open today. Um, and then when I finally met my coordinator, it was in 2010. I was at another prison, and she came. She came to meet me. Um, she was a short lady, and she had to be in the wheelchair, and they allowed me to push a wheelchair around the prison compound, and such. So that was the beginning of me reaching and trying to find a way to heal Not only that, but to try to find a way to forgive myself, to try to find a way to understand why I did what I did, because I needed to know what made me go to that extent.
Yeah.
And so I left that prison and went to another one in 2013. I was the guys from here in Northern Virginia in the DC area would always share the Washington Post newspaper, and it happened to be I get the paper. I looked in the Metro section and I see an article about Amanda, and she was in a domestic violence relationship that he had abused her, and I wanted to know who was the author of the article, and I seen the person. I called my sister in Boston to look this person up and give me this person's address because I wanted to write to him, and she did. And I wrote to him, and he wrote me back, and he wrote me back, and then he wrote me back again with a list of questions that was not no jokes. It was questions that I had to actually get go deep, and I had to start pulling that stuff out, and it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy because he recently sent me a list of questions too for me to answer again because he's in the process of writing a book about this experience.
Yeah.
Can
And
Daniel, can I interrupt for 2 seconds? There's so much that has been covered here, and I feel like I need to slow down for 2 seconds and come back around to this idea of the environment that you grew up with. You didn't really go into it in this interview, but that you were severely abused by your father pretty much from the day that you were born. And I want to get that out there because I think this idea of self-punishment and self-hatred, a lot of people deal with this in our world and don't even know, um, don't have an understanding of what self-loathing looks like. And I think in your story, it is the extreme. And I think that for me, what is so powerful about your story, that if you can spend 30 years in prison and you can grow up in such intense um, abuse, and you can because I know that you had shared with me in our first interview that you spent a lot of time in solitary confinement in prison because you had such a deep loathing, didn't feel like you were worthy of more than that. And you talk about sort of these light bulb moments that you wanted to deal with your anger, that you wanted to um, find some redemption for yourself, and that you are asked these deep questions. And I think what I would love for you to share at this point in this interview is when you had that moment of clarity in prison, when you felt that you were worthy. Because for you to get to worthiness, I really want to put some context around it for our listeners. Um, because there are so many different things that we do as human beings, and we carry that guilt and shame throughout our lifetime. And I want to hear from you, what was that first light bulb moment that you were worthy of living a different kind of life other than this deep self-hatred and shame?
you know, it was around. It was after my mother's death in '97. Um, I was there. I was in the hole, and I ended up actually reading uh, Alex Haley, Alex Haley's book of Malcolm X. That was a turning point for me. For some reason, that kind of just it kind of said I need to. It spoke to me. The book spoke to me in a different way, and it got
Why? What was it? What spoke to you in that book that
the things that he went through, the things that he went through as Malcolm Little before he came Malcolm X, the things that he grew through in Oklahoma, with the way that his father was killed, but the way that he fought through a lot of things, how he persevered through a lot of what was going on, and how after, to the extent of, in prison, he became a member of the Nation of Islam, but he also became a person that was willing to do something better and different with his life, and that was the part that got me. And after that, I came out of the hole and ended up getting a job working in the tailor shop that made not only the prisoners' clothes, but it made the CO's clothes, and that was a start. That was a turn. That was a start because prior to that, the hole was my best friend because it was where I could be in the dark. I didn't have to worry about light, and it was where I felt most comfortable at. It was where it was something that just I didn't have to deal with people, and people didn't have to deal with my madness. And so that after reading that, because most of the time in there, I kept the lights was off. Lights really didn't shine in it because you had this big plate and three holes in it that you look out the plate. Um, and it and the only time I really turned the light on was actually when um stand for count, or they serve breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But it made me, but that was my space. So when I read that book, it turned something deep in me, and that's why within that 3 years later, I was, or 4 years later, I was able to just start getting things going up here to find out what was going on in here, and it was a difference, but um it was a lot of work to do. And
Yeah, and I want to say a couple of things because I think what always strikes me with this story. You had been in prison for how long when you had that moment of clarity?
that moment, well, right then and there, I would say 7 years. It was
7 years.
after 7 years, but I didn't get it going until after 11 years is when I really got it going.
And I think that what is so beautiful about this particular story is I think that you know, I talk about this a lot as a therapist with clients I work with. That is sometimes in our darkest hour, right? I do a lot of grief and loss work. In that darkest hour, um, that we crack wide open and allow the light to come in. And I think that um, I did a lot of volunteer work with prison, with people, with guys in prison, and I could feel the darkness. I could feel the energy, the oppression within, behind those walls within prison, and there is so much self-loathing, right, with people who are incarcerated for various things, whether it's addiction or aggression or murder. Um, and Valerie, I can feel too that you want to say something, but I want to just ask you, Daniel, um, in all of this work that you've done, the 30 years that you spent in prison, the work that you have done, I want to know honestly where you are now with your sense of self forgiveness and shame and self love.
You know, where I am now, I'm in a lot I'm in the best space that I can be. December the 8th, I completed a domestic violence facilitating
Congratulations.
through the Family Peace Initiative. Um, I'm willing to put myself out there in spaces that says that, this is what uh, can happen when a person takes the initiative to do the work to heal from that. Um, what help was a big thing, but help was a big issue. That was October the 4th, was the publication, was the how the Marshall Project published the article that was sent to them about how I killed my wife, and it's still to this day the only article that a man has ever written on domestic violence.
I read it. It was a good
And
article.
and just being not afraid to to do the be seen. And because I was just at a returning citizens conference Friday, and I wasn't ashamed to tell the people I talked to that I'm a domestic violence facilitator. I wasn't. So that's helped so much. Um, Challenging myself to find out what else is in here that's not afraid to say, well, I was taught that I was stupid, I was ugly, I was a whole lot of things, and I believed those things when I was coming up, and being treated like that and allow other people to treat me like that. I'm not all of that, you
Yeah.
know.
I
I'm
think
not.
that can be really healing to have those opposing experiences. I think for me, like, one thing that I am understanding about you, obviously, and I can relate to it too, is like carrying that warrior, resilient energy. And I think when, just to share a little bit about my experience to relate to yours in some way, like being resilient and being that warrior that's not going to give up can certainly drive you to all of these things. For you, you're doing all of these classes and having all of these moments and speaking, and it's so beautiful. And you're going to dive right in the same way to the positive as you did to the negative. And I think that I also took a similar stance when I started to step into my healing journey, coming from the other side of it, where I tried anything and everything to figure out, what was missing in me, where is my issues around self-love that, allowed me to step into the situations of domestic violence to begin with. And, I think the hardest part for me to realize, being resilient and being like highly motivated and carrying that warrior energy that you also carry, was really being gentle with myself. And I think that, being a warrior in life is so beautiful, because you're going to teach so many people so many things. And part of that journey will be really healing for you, as it was for me. The work that I do now is so healing, and it heals me as much as it heals the people that I work with. But really getting to that point where you realize, carrying that energy, that sometimes you don't want to be strong anymore. You just want to curl up in a little ball and have somebody nurture you. You don't want to carry that intensity sometimes. And I think once I was able to recognize that need for myself, it actually like lifted a whole nother layer of burden that I was carrying within my own energy. I'm sharing this with you because I see it in you also, right? Where like that shell and that burden of like what you have to do now, that I need to do all of this now. And like that, it's so black and white, right? So you had this really negative experience, and now you're going to go to the extreme opposite. But really, like, okay, how do you nurture yourself now? That was the hard part for me.
Mm,
And I think that I don't even want to put you on the spot there. I just want you to sit with it, because I don't know that you've taken that time yet. I can feel that heaviness still in you. And I want to share that with you, because I also like had that same energy. It was a huge healing moment for me that you can't get from all of these outside experiences. And in giving back, it has to come from internally nurturing.
y- you know, and that's a good place, because I keep saying, am I trying to prove something to other people that I am worthy?
Yeah.
What am I doing these things to for them to pat me on my back and say, that I am? Or
And I don't want you to question that, actually, because I think having those experiences can be incredibly healing, considering where you came from. And so instead of looking at it as a negative mindset where you're like, why am I doing this? Like, knowing why you're doing this. I want to be able to provide experiences where other people might not feel alone. Don't question the authenticity of that moment, and know that all of the accolades and confirmations along the way is also going to be a healing moment for you, even, in the realm of you doing this for all of these other reasons. I just wanted to share that also.
But those are questions that I have asked myself. I have
Yeah.
asked myself those questions because I had to definitely investigate what's going on with me, and why is it that I feel like I'm still seeking other people's approval because of not getting it from my family.
Yeah.
My oldest brother I haven't spoken to in 52 years. And I've got to a point that I've been so disappointed, him not reaching out. I had tried reaching out. I'm not going to try no more. But also too, it's like 52 years. He's my oldest brother, and he hasn't tried at all. But he has criticized me, and has gotten back to me. And I've gotten to a point where if he was to pass today, yesterday, tomorrow, whatever, don't tell me, because there's no connection there whatsoever
Yeah.
in comparison to when I wrote to Chris and he wrote me back. He came to visit. He brought his wife to visit. He's been a part of my life ever since 2013. We last talked Saturday, and he's my big brother.
Yeah. I think that,
Yeah.
um, like, uh, what I was kind of sharing about what I see in you, and also kind of similarly, like what I experienced for myself, like you had a void and then you're still trying to fill a void, right? Just on the other side of it. It's just on the other side. And then really like filling that void within from yourself to yourself, where, you know, it's not other people giving to you, it's you giving to you. And I think that within the healing journey, it's really hard to understand deep self-love, and those things can be certainly really healing, having those external experiences, but getting to that point where you're nurturing you. And how do you start that? Where do you go, understanding that you have to have that love for yourself?
Mm. You know what? That's a question that would definitely need direction on.
Yeah, it is true, right? So for me, it was a 7-year journey, and even up until recently, like I was still clearing layers of abuse within my experiences. And certainly moments where stuff is surfacing, you almost just feel like you want to die. Like, God, how much more healing do I have to do? You know, in the spiritual community, they call it a dark night of the soul, or however you want to express it, where all of a sudden everything is bubbling up all at once. I think energy healing for me was something that really like shifted and empowered me, because we hold so much in, especially in the ancestral lines. I think that you can have these visceral responses and visceral reactions where you're like, I've done all of this, why am I still having these thoughts? Or I've done all of this, why did I just react in such an intense way? And it's there's some depth to that, within our bodies.
Last year, um, somebody I thought was a friend, but divulged stuff to him. We used to talk all the time. He started working with me, and first thing he started to do was show me that his way of putting me down, or and and I was confused about the way he was acting towards me, and he kept doing it, he kept doing it, and then August of last year, he started working in March, and by August of last year, I came to start. You know, is it? I need to put myself in positions with this guy that I need his approval of me so bad that I will accept anything that he does to me.
Yeah.
And that's when what's her name, Puma Children. I'm not really getting her last name out, but I listened to her and I started to turn it over in my heart. And I kept doing it and I kept feeling. And since then, the distance between what was like this is now so far out of and it's growing even more because turning it over with him was the way that says, I'm going to teach you how to treat me and I'm not going to lie.
Challenging the energy. And in the line of work that we do, you have your energetic experience that tells you how to behave a certain way, and you just challenging that energy in a really deep way so you can have a different experience, and just kind of release that pattern.
But it makes me feel like, as I did when I was young, is what did I do wrong to you
Yeah.
that as it was with my father, like what did I do to you why you need to keep doing that to me? Like what did I do? And it's the same as with him. It's like what did I do to you that you need to keep that you thought that was okay for you to treat me that way?
And the answer is nothing, right? And we know that, right? So I think, when we have these experiences that remind us of another experience, our reaction is actually the only thing that matters. And you stepping into creating a healthy boundary for yourself will allow for a different experience, where it's like, it doesn't matter who you are, that these are my needs within our interaction. And I'm going to honor myself along the way. And it's really hard to consistently step into that coming from the place where you came from. And so I think it's really beautiful that you were able to pick up on that, recognize the pattern in that moment, and then say you want to have a different experience. And I think that on any given day, you'll draw in every type of person, low vibrational to high vibrational people. You're going to have all of the experience, but who you align to is based on your actions and reactions within the moment, right? So, in that moment, you're like, oh, we don't align. I don't want to be treated that way. And he can go and treat somebody else that way, but you're no longer aligned to having an experience like that. It can be really empowering when you get to that point where you realize that you have the control of those experiences, just by honoring yourself and having a voice instead of like sweeping things under the rug. Like, I don't need to say anything, or I don't need to shift this moment. Like, he is who he is. I'm just going to step into acceptance. And you should never step into acceptance when it comes to loving and honoring yourself.
Mm.
So that's beautiful that you did that. I just want to honor that moment, because those were really hard moments for me to step into for myself, coming from a place of, issues around self-love. And when I was able to do that consistently, it was when I really aligned to some really beautiful people in my life. And you get to the point where you realize that those moments can show you one of two things. You still carry the wound, or gratitude that you're not in it anymore.
I don't want to carry the wound.
Yeah.
I've carried wounds. Last year was the best year of my life. At 62, it was the best year. When I went to Hawaii and spoke at the conference in Hawaii, this was given to me, and it means noble. And I never thought that I could actually go through and grow through and and manage a lot of different things that I was able to do last year. Um, but most important is the fact is I was willing to grow through it. Whatever and hard it was, I was given a manager's position. Um, where I'm still employed at, and by August I was giving it to it in April, and by August I was giving it back because I wasn't ready to actually put myself to manage anybody because I feel like I wasn't I wasn't there.
Yeah.
Now here it is. Now I got accepted um, on December the 15th of last year to be in this leadership academy, and it's like really, and it's a big deal.
Yeah.
It's a big deal for me because not only is it through Virginia Commonwealth University, but it's the training that I get that I'm getting from it, and how it's having me look at me in a different, not no arrogant, no pompous, no grandiosity at position, but
It's empowerment instead of power, right?
yeah,
There's a difference when you're coming from a place of empowerment instead of ego. Um, and that can be a really beautiful thing. It's nothing to be scared of, where before you were coming from a place of power based on your trauma, where it's like you had all of these traumatic experiences, so you needed to feel powerful in some way, and this is how you were going to infuse that through these actions or behaviors. And I don't want you to step into something like this and be scared when you have a similar frequency running through you, but it's coming from a healthy place. And so I think like really embracing the difference and understanding the difference between power and being empowered. And I think it can be a really beautiful shift for you, where you can embrace that and understand the authenticity and beautiful experience that you can have coming from a place of empowerment.
and
Yeah.
that's why I wore this shirt. No more stigma and no more shame.
Yes, I love that. Oh, I didn't even get to read that whole thing.
Oh, I love it,
I know
Trace.
that we're probably going to be wrapping up soon. I know
Yep.
what you were going to do, but I do want to say, Daniel, when we are done with this, I'd like to just kind of like reach out on the side and see if we can maybe figure out me like doing a breath work session for you to release some of that like real visceral energy that's being held within your physical body. It can be really a powerful shift. Through our talking, I can still feel some heaviness. I really like want to offer that to you as part of like you stepping into like this new experience, if it's something that you might be open to.
Very much so, because I really wanted to feel with it. Um, it's an old album that came out in '86, and I recognized it so much, and it's still so relevant, but it doesn't get a lot of play. It's by Peter Gabriel, so and that's what I want to feel. I want to. The first song is I have a steam train. If I just lay down my tracks, I can have an airplane flying and bring back my blue skies back. You know, and I want to be able. The whole album, he talks about his addiction,
Yeah, it's
and
not an
it's
easy thing to deal with.
but
But I
one
think for you, like having an experience like this might allow you to step out of that warrior mode and kind of step into that self-nurturing energy. And I think it'll be a different feel for you, where you can just kind of release a little bit based on you to you. I think it could be really beautiful.
yeah, I'm definitely open. I'm definitely open, and that's the thing about it is anything that will make me grow and make me become what my best self is. I know and seen what my worst self is, but I'm still yet to find out what my best self is.
Yeah.
We all are. It's work in progress. And Daniel, we are at the top of the hour. I'm going to wind us down. I want to thank you so much for joining us today and for this incredible conversation. And I can't wait to see what you go on to do. And thank you, Val, for also your sharing. And we will have Daniel, I'd like to offer up in the show notes a link to the article I did read it. I don't know if you have that available, but I will try to find that so that we can include that.
Yeah,
And
yeah. Google. All you got to do is Google. It pops right up.
yeah. Is there anything else that you would like to say to our listeners before we say goodbye? Anything we didn't ask you? Anything at all?
Finding my place is knowing that the story's never. It never stops. It never stops until you stop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's when the story stops. That's the only. That's it. My son. I have my son. He died a day after my birthday. We was inconsistent in our relationship, and but he did send me a message, "Happy birthday, Dad," and he died the very next day.
Wow.
But he's not dead because death is never final.
Right.
He just transitioned from one space and time to another. That's it.
Thank you, Daniel. And
Thank you
thank you.
for being so vulnerable today. I appreciate you sharing and hearing and relating with my experience too. Obviously, we're coming from opposite ends of the spectrum within the situation of domestic violence, and I think that just having compassion for both sides and understanding the healing process and the steps that we're taking, both of us, in our journey. And I just want to honor all of the effort that you're putting into yourself. It's not easy, really peeling back the layers of trauma and experiences. And I think that you're doing an incredible job.
Yeah.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Valerie. And definitely that healing process. I would love to get started ASAP.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I want to thank all of our listeners too. Thanks, you guys. I trust that you will take what you need to hear on your own journey. And we'll see you guys here next week. Bye for now.
Okay, bye.
I thank you, listeners. Greg, thank you for allowing me to share.